following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by the Package Tourist in the magical mystery tour called Life, Matthew DiBiase, who tonight will be discussing last week's Democratic presidential debates, the return of Bernie Sanders to the campaign, and the state of the Democratic presidential race.
Thank you, Ralph. Last week we had the fourth Democratic presidential debate, and what we saw is basically, the same people going around again. Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and major candidates, Amy Klobuchar, Senator Klobuchar, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Castro and Pete Buttigieg and Gabbard. And what we had is also the return of Bernie Sanders after several weeks of convalescing from a heart attack. And what we saw here is a change in the dynamics, whereas in the first three debates we saw former Vice President Joe Biden suffer a lot of buffeting at the hands of the other candidates. Now it was Elizabeth Warren's turn to be on the receiving end of the brunt of criticism. And in many ways, that was sort of like a blessing in disguise for Bernie Sanders, because whereas before in the previous debate, Bernie Sanders, in addition to Joe Biden, caught a lot of heat from the other candidates. This time, he was able to get some breathing space. It gave him some breathing space where he could express his views, whereas Elizabeth Warren caught most of the heat. And I think this allowed Bernie Sanders to come back strong in the debate and really, in a sense, recapture his old magic, recapture his passion, his intensity, basically his claim to being the voice of the new left of the Democratic Party. And I think he regained his form, whereas before in debates 2 and 3, I think he sort of lost some energy because now we know he was struggling with health problems. But I think this several weeks rest did him some good. I think he was able to regain his strength, and I think he showed great strength in that debate. Actually, far greater strength than former Vice President Joe Biden. And that's kind of ironic because everyone was worried about Bernie Sanders' health. They were talking about his age. I mean, is he simply too old to continue the campaign? Has he lost something? And actually, the irony is, no, he hadn't lost anything. He had not lost his punch at all. He had not lost his strength. Actually, it was Joe Biden who seems to be, I don't mean to sound insensitive, but in a sense, he seemed to be more his age, as it were. He seemed to be the one who was struggling, who seemed to be sort of fumbling, and or more likely grasping at straws. And in a sense, that's not good for Biden. I mean, if he's supposed to be the front runner, although right now he's neck and neck with Elizabeth Warren, if he's trying to pose himself off as being the strongest possible candidate, and he's showing that he's grasping for answers, clutching at straws, as he were several times during the debate. When they was talking about his own son Hunter, his response to the question about his son recusing himself, it was a very so-so answer. And on other questions, like on jobs, he seemed like he was grasping for straws, and also the income inequality question, he was fumbling and rambling and just like he was grasping at straws there. And even on the Turkish issue, he was evasive and not very strong. And he's not doing himself any good. And in many ways, it's helping Sanders out because now, every time Biden speaks, he weakens himself, and Bernie, that gives room for Bernie to gain ground, to gain greater strength, and he has gotten key strength. I mean, since that debate, he's gotten key endorsements from documentarian Michael Moore, from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That was a very key, endorsement, at a major rally, and he's still drawing crowds. He's still attracting people. And I think all Bernie Sanders can do is go up and onward and upward, especially if people are beginning, as long as Elizabeth Warren is not showing strength in these debates, and I don't think she is. I think in many ways she's not really holding up under stress. I think on the foreign policy question, she was very weak. And on the Kurdish issue, she was rambling. She wasn't really showing any type of cohesive thought. Let's see. On the Medicare for all, she wasn't really answering the question. This was supposed to be an issue where she was supposed to hit it out of the park, because basically she's trying to align herself with Bernie Sanders for Medicare for all, even though there are differences on how each candidate approaches the question. I mean, Sanders is upright and honest about increasing taxes to cover the issue, as Warren refuses to really provide a solid, substantial answer to that. And she wasn't, on the Medicare for all issue, she wasn't really answering the question. She was rambling, whereas Sanders handled it far better. And here's the funny thing: during that question, Senator Klobuchar hit Elizabeth Warren very hard on that, and actually she had a chance to hit Bernie Sanders on that question, but no, she refused to attack Sanders, which I thought was highly significant. And I had the impression, I was wondering, was Senator Klobuchar trying to maneuver herself as being like Bernie Sanders' running mate if Bernie, God willing, gets the nomination? I had that thought. I don't know. In terms of the female candidates, I thought Senator Klobuchar acquitted herself the best. I mean, I think in terms of who did the best in that debate, I think it was Bernie Sanders first, Senator Klobuchar second, and then Mayor Pete Buttigieg was kind of like a distant third in terms of effectiveness there. Which for Buttigieg was an improvement, because even though he did good in the very first debate, in debates 2 and 3, I thought he had dropped off and was actually rather ineffective. But this time, I think in answering the various questions, like on the impeachment issue, he handled quite decently. On the Medicare for all issue, he handled very decently. On the income inequality, he handled very well. On the foreign policy issue, he hit Tulsi Gabbard very, very hard and very effectively on that issue. On the gun violence issue, he was able to hit Beto O'Rourke quite effectively on that issue. I think Buttigieg kind of recovered a bit, but his odds of actually capturing the nomination, I don't think are rather good. But I think Klobuchar was very shrewd. She handled the impeachment. She showed the proper indignation on the impeachment question. She hit Elizabeth Warren very effectively on the Medicare for all question. Let's see. On the income inequality, she was able to hit Elizabeth Warren very hard on that. Her only weak moment was on the Turkey and Kurdish, the genocide issue involving the Kurds. She was rather weak on that and not very effective, and that was kind of like a disappointing moment. On the Russia issue, when the other candidates like O'Rourke and Steyer and Yang were rambling and not really answering the question about Russian interference, Klobuchar really scored well on that. She hit Yang, when Yang dismissively saying, Russian interference was not a real major issue because we ourselves did it ourselves. She really hit him hard and very effectively on that question. Another weak moment for Klobuchar was on the gun violence issue. She didn't really handle the gun violence issue rather well. She was evasive on that. But getting back to Bernie, I'm convinced that Bernie, unlike Joe Biden, is just determined to go out on his issues. He is not apologizing for his stances. He will not back down. He is appealing to his base, and I think what he's asking Americans to do is take that leap and not be afraid to be radical, not be afraid to take that extra step and counter Trump's radicalism with his own radicalism. In a sense, counter this fascist takeover of this country with a new birth of liberalism, a new form of liberalism, a newer form of liberalism. And he's asking the people to flock to a standard. And I think based on these new endorsements and based on the fact that he's still gaining money and still getting support, I think he's got a chance at regaining the lead. I think we've got, almost 3 months to the Iowa caucuses. And that's a long time for Elizabeth Warren. I mean, right now she's building up, but all she can do is go down. And the fact that she's getting hit hard during these debates, and I don't think she's holding up well for it in the face of it. I think as we get closer to caucus day in Iowa, I think Bernie has a chance to surge past both Biden and Warren. And I think do like he did, in 2016 and take the Iowa. He didn't take Iowa, but just get a chance to steal a victory there and build on that and build up his campaign and use his organization and use his base from 3 years ago to build on that and knock Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren out. And if he can take New Hampshire, that would be an even greater decisive victory, especially beating Warren in her own backyard. That would really knock her candidacy for a loop. But I think what we have to do now is, I think you've got to winnow out the field. I think you've got to get rid of the lesser lights here and just focus on the main leaders here. Biden, Warren, and Bernie, and maybe Klobuchar, in terms of leadership here. I think they have to. I think you've got to get rid of the dead weights there and just and broaden out the field and allow others, the flock to Bernie's standard, as it were. I don't get Beto O'Rourke. For me, O'Rourke, he seems to be lost in his own grandiloquence. He's trying to sound Lincoln-esque instead of just answering questions. He's trying to go for that rhetorical grand slam instead of just answering the basic questions. And he's blowing opportunities, and he has done that through each of the 4 debates. He has blown opportunities. He can't see the forest for the rhetorical trees. He's trying to win on elocution instead of answering questions and being substantial. The only time he's shown any real spark is on the gun issue, when he decided he's called out for confiscating the assault weapons. That's the only time he's ever really scored and not actually drawn any type of reaction from his own party or even from the opposition. And he's forgetting that aspect. I mean, if he focused more on making statements like that, like I'm going after the guns and being more aggressive in that sense, his candidacy would be more effective. But he's not, and that's why Buttigieg's taking advantage of that, because unlike O'Rourke, Buttigieg will give solid and substantial answers to key questions and propose effective alternatives. And O'Rourke hasn't really proposed any effective alternatives. For Elizabeth Warren, I just don't get that sense that she can take it all the way. With certain candidates, you get that feeling about them that, yes, they move you. They can speak to the heart. And Elizabeth Warren has not really spoken to the heart at all, at least not to my heart. I don't get that zing like I get it from Bernie Sanders. Sometimes I get that zing from Pete Buttigieg. I mean, especially in that first debate, he scored some really good moments and made some really good solid points there. And with her, I just don't see her having that sustainability to take it all the way. I think sooner or later she's going to falter, and I think she's going to fall to the wayside, and I think others will fill that void. Bernie Sanders and quite possibly Senator Klobuchar. With Biden, I think each debate he just gets weaker and weaker, and I think he too has to fade. I mean, he's making money, but in my view, he just every time he talks, he weakens himself. He's not really building up a case, and he has done that in the past. He did it in '88. He did it in '08. It just isn't there anymore. And actually, he looks like a politician who he looks like he's past his prime. His time is irrevocably past. And you could say his time passed, 11 years ago, you could say that, or even further back, you could say his time has passed. And I don't see him making it. I think if there's a future for the Democratic Party, it's got to be Bernie Sanders. I think he's the one who was articulate what the elder Bush said, the vision thing. I think Sanders has genuine vision. I think he has a genuine program. You can call it radical, but at least it's significant change. And I think that's what the Democratic Party needs, is to articulate significant change. You're seeing this. You're seeing it in the new members of Congress, the new senators there. They want a new beginning, a new birth of freedom, as it were, a new voice and a new vision. And I think we've got to get behind Bernie Sanders. And I think we've got to rally to his flag. I think he's the only one who can create that passion that you need to overthrow Donald Trump and his corporate fascist clique. I think you need that passion, you need that intensity, you need that tidal wave to counteract the tidal wave that's threatening to engulf this country and in fact engulf the planet, because it's not just our own country that's being destroyed from within, but it's also innocent people like the Kurds who are being annihilated in a genocidal campaign simply because Trump has basically left them to die at the hands of the Turks. In a sense, just as in the 20th century the Turks committed the Armenian genocide, now in the 21st century the Turks are committing the Kurdish genocide. So in a sense, history is repeating itself again, all because of the callous indifference of Donald Trump and the fact that he couldn't make a profit from the Kurds, but he's making a profit from the Turks. And I think that is a shameful aspect of what's going on in our country today. And we need a new passion and a new liberalism to overcome that cruelty and that sadism and that growth of fascism. And that new passion can be found in Bernie Sanders. And all we can hope is that he continues to build and maintain and grow in stature, and come polling day in Iowa, he wins the Iowa caucuses. So I want to say good night to everyone, and I'd just like to remind people that, like Edmund Burke said in 1789, the only way for evil to flourish is that it is required that the good do nothing. And I say to the good people of America, get up and do something good and put a stop to this evil. Thank you and good night. And next week, our topic will be conservative cults of personality. Thank you and good night.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.